particular attention to drive political will and prove technical knowledge. We know that OAT is the gold standard for drug treatment. It's not only effective for HIV and hepatitis C prevention, but also helps adherence to ARV and hepatitis C treatment. So I just want to share some of my experiences on being on OAT for pretty much all my adult life, from when I was 21 years old with a few years break in between, and can honestly say that it is a life-saving drugs. So prior to the methadone, the dangers of having to access heroin in an illegal market, being on methadone and buprenorphine is really able to mitigate those dangers, including risk of overdose. And entering into methadone and buprenorphine treatment, means that people who use drugs are able to take greater control of their life. You can regulate, your drug use. Being on methadone and buprenorphine also helped me to complete, my education, hold down employment, and basically, essentially being able to live, a regular life. And this is because it gives you access to safe supply. And, the world does not have a drug problem, but the problem is that people who use drugs aren't able to live, a normal life. And being able to live a normal life is, a lot of times considered abnormal for people who use opioids. I was privileged to grow up in a country which has been an early adopter of harm reduction, and in Australia, and it is because of this that it's had a low HIV incidence rate amongst people who inject drugs. But I was also, lucky enough to then, also in this context, be able to access methadone and buprenorphine in India, Hong Kong, and Italy. But I think what is really, important to look at, and what these resources will contribute to, is, really considering how OAT can be designed and delivered in the optimal way, because it goes beyond just having the medication available. We need to be designing and delivering programs in ways that don't make life harder for people who use drugs, which, if done in that way, really defeats the purpose of even having treatment available. We need to look at how to design and deliver OAT programs in the best interests, of the person. So it's not just about, social control of people who use drugs, and not about punishing people who use drugs that don't conform. So I think, one of the first issues of OAT programs is that it can be very difficult, to enter into programs. There are long waiting lists. And, each day of waiting, it is an additional hurdle. And it takes people further and further away from, having that stability. Clinics expect daily attendance, and of course with COVID, having take-home doses available and really pushing for that has really been, spotlighted. And this is because, daily attendance makes it extremely difficult for people, that are employed or live very far away, especially in rural areas. Personally, the last time that I entered back into buprenorphine treatment, it was a difficult decision because I had to, weigh up whether they would allow me to have take-home doses. And of course, having take-home doses means that you're able to fulfill job obligations. Thirdly, there are supervised urine tests, and these are forced in the sense that if you don't provide them or refuse, that you can be thrown off programs, or if you have a positive urine test, you also risk being expelled from the program. So after about 15 years of being on programs, I've had lots of time to think about what being part of clinics or entering into treatment means for people who use drugs, and how there is often, really a difference between the stated goal and the reality of the program. You know, in many ways, or in all ways, they're supposed to be about care, right? But this care can sometimes become quite coercive, where drug control rationales, you know, bleed into health and treatment practices when they really should be separate. You know, because of all these, you know, rules and regulations and, you know, often practices that are about control, this is why many people who use drugs, you know, don't enter into treatment, even when they are available. And, you know, we don't want drug treatment services to, you know, follow the same trend of other health services for people who use drugs, who often experience them as, you know, very punishing, or, you know, you enter into health services and you're disrespected and, you know, made to feel shame. And of course, in that context, you know, no one wants to then willingly, you know, attend health services. So we'll never get to global goals, national goals, you know, without really addressing stigma and discrimination. If we look at the recent crisis, or if we look at the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, I think it really exposed all too clearly how poorly planned and designed OAT programs can be, or the impact that it has when they're poorly planned and designed. For instance, as soon as the invasion started, you know, people who use drugs advocated to the Ministry of Health for 15 to 30-day take-home doses, which really, you know, should have always been available. And they needed this to be able to keep themselves safe from violence. And of course, also the mass movement of people really highlighted the strict entry requirements and limited spaces for OAT clients across the ECA region, but as well as in Western Europe. So of course, OAT programs require proper planning, and we've seen, you know, a whole suite of stock outs in the last couple of years. And unlike other medications, you know, stock outs of OAT can be literally life-threatening. We've seen in a recent stock out in Kazakhstan, you know, 2 people died and 1 person was incarcerated. So, you know, when we look at COVID-related flexibilities that came in, they are being, you know, rolled back, as I'm sure, you know, this research will show in this resource. And despite being, you know, essential medicines, you know, we are really worried that, you know, these flexibilities will continue to be under threat and literally put people's lives at risk. So I think, you know, we really need to start looking at how we right the wrongs of drug treatment if we are really serious about the right to health and life. People who use drugs should be consulted and listened to on how OAT programs are started and adapted, because, you know, a successful program is not really possible unless you have the engagement of people who use drugs, of the clients. You know, you need people to be voluntarily entering into harm reduction services and continuing treatment. And a well-designed, co-created harm reduction program, you know, builds trust. The trust of people who use drugs in health and social services overall, you know, ultimately building social connection and integration. So I'll just stop there.